Okay, so here I have a little design I made with daisies, and I added some stems and leaves. And if you look in the colour film, you can see the stems and leaves are separate. But I've also got, if I scroll up, after each leaf I've added in an extra stitch, and I'll tell you why later. But I wanted them to stitch as one, because if you don't do anything to this, what you'll end up with is jump stitches from the stem to the leaf, or depending on how you order them. So if I go to my design 2 where I haven't done it yet, and I've made it blue so you can see clearly, if I have two separate objects, the stem is stitching first in this instance, it finishes here, and then it's got to jump back up and do the leaf. Now in version 9 they do have a tool called branching, but branching uses a running stitch to travel to the object, such as the leaf, and stitch it, and then travel to the next leaf if you have more than one leaf, and then it will stitch this cover stitch over the top. The trouble is I've used let me just select that. What did I use? I've used the stem stitch, which and if I have a running stitch running through that, it's going to show because it's an open stitch. It's not a closed over satin stitch that would hide a running stitch. In addition to that, my leaf object is starting here and finishing there, and because I used a contour fill, I can't move the start and end points. If I select the leaf and go to the reshape tool, you can see here that I've got angles in my stitch in my object so that it will take the contour fill, and the start and end are both at the beginning here, but it's still finishing over here. So it won't matter where I move this start and end, it's going to finish here, just because of the nature of the way contour fill works. It starts at one end and finishes at the other end of the object. So what I did to get around all this was I used a combination of adding an extra running stitch in to come back down to the base of the leaf so that it started and finished here properly. And then I used a tool called stitch editing, which allows me to cut and paste this leaf exactly where I want it along the path of this stem stitch. Now with stitch editing, you must remember that you do it last, because if you then edit the stem or the leaf in any way, you will lose the stitch editing that you have put in and you will have to redo it. So what you need to do, if I go back to the daisies, is to get all your stitch order in place before you start, and make sure all your elements of your design are stitching exactly how you want them before you start playing around adding stitch edit. Okay, so I've got, if I go to colour blocks it might be easier, I've got the petals stitching first, then the centres, and then the stems and leaves, and I sorted all that out before I added the stitch editing in. And then within those areas, if I go back here, you can see that I have actually got each object stitching in the right order as well, within each colour block. So I'm not going to touch anything at all. I've checked my stitch flow and everything is working properly. Now just to show you, in case you didn't quite understand what I meant by making the leaf stitch halfway along the stem, I'll just show you in my finished design how that stitches. So I'll just take my stitch player back and hit play, and it's just finishing off the centre of this flower, and then it's going to start the first stem. Here it is here, and you can see here it's stitching the leaf before it continues on with the stem. So there are no jump stitches from to the leaves. I've eliminated all of those, and it just makes for a much smoother stitch out. Your machine's not tying off unnecessarily, and you get a really nice flow of the stitching. So it actually speeds up the overall stitching and reduces tie in tie offs and just keeps the whole design very neat. Okay, so now that's finished, if I close that and go out of true view, you can see I've got no jump stitches going to those little leaves here. I've got jump stitches between the red and between the gold centres of the flowers, and then of course to the start of each of the stems, but I haven't got any jump stitches from to the leaves, so I've eliminated all of those. So let's go back to my design 2 and let me show you how I achieved that. So I'm going to go out of reshape into the select tool and click off so nothing's selected. So the first thing I need to do is, I know this leaf ends here. You can see this is actually the last stitch in this design. And so I want to stitch from there back down to here so that I can connect this leaf to the stem stitching stem here. So I'm going to digitize an open object, and it's just going to be an outline stitch and in the same color, and I'm going to start exactly where that ends so that it doesn't tie off there. So I've put a left click there, and I'm actually just going to click over here, which will close off the end of that leaf nicely too, and then I'm just going to follow that same stitch line down here back to where this leaf started and enter. So I've got an extra row of stitching there. You can see it here running along the bottom of the leaf. Now that I've got that start and end actually at the beginning of the leaf here, I can now add that into the stem. So what I need to do is select this. Well, I don't need to select the stem. I need to click off so that nothing's selected. And I need to go to the edit toolbox and come down to stitch edit. So that also shows up here in your travel toolbar, but I like to just use it from here. You can't click on it up here. You have to activate it down here anyway, but then you can travel through the design using stitch edit quicker, but I use the keyboard arrows on my keyboard to travel through the design stitch by stitch. It's much easier. So activate your stitch edit tool, and then you need to click somewhere on the stem. Now, which end did the stem start at? It started at this end here. This is where I've got a little tiny blue circle inside that green circle. The green circle is actually signifying I've set my design to start at the very first stitch of the design. So that is why I've got a green circle there, and I'm not in true view. So that green circle and the white cross here show up when you're not in true view, and they signify the very start of the design and the very end of the design. But if you look closely inside that green circle, there's a little black circle, which is the start of that particular object. So I know that this stem is going to stitch down this way, so I want to actually get to the stitch that is closest to the start of the leaf, which is here. So I'm going to click on one of the needle points. Now you can show your needle points here or hide them with this little show needle points icon, or just press the period key on your keyboard to turn it on or off. And they don't show up very well on this background, but they are there. So I'm just going to click on one of them. When you've got stitch edit activated and you click on one of the needle points, you'll get your little white cross will go to that point. It's a bit hard to see, but the first part of this design is actually the blue colour, because I've in effect stitched through to that point where I've got that cross. The rest of the design is black and will change colour as I move the cross through the design. So I'm going to zoom in again, and here's my little cross here. I'll just go out a little bit. There we go. And I'm now going to use the keys on my keyboard. Now I only want to move one stitch at a time, so I'm moving the sideways arrows on my keyboard, and I'm going forward, so I'm going to use the right hand pointing arrow. So I pressed once and it moved to the next stitch. I pressed again and it moved to the next stitch. Again it's moved to the next stitch, and again. Now it is at the closest point to this start here. Now, provided that is less than 2 millimeters between those 2 points, it will actually start this leaf from there. I could have started here, but then it would have jumped over here anyway. So this is the start of the leaf, not the last stitch I created. It's the start of that leaf right at that circle, and I would suspect that that's less than 2 millimeters. If I put my grid on, well, I can only see one grid line, so let me zoom out a bit. This is 10 millimeters, and so that is definitely less than 2 millimeters across there. So I'll just turn that grid off again. So now I know that I can now cut and paste this. Now I need to cut and paste both those objects into this spot. So I'm going to actually group those first. So I'm going to select the leaf and select the, hold my shift key down and select the line I digitized and group those so that I can cut and paste them now to that point where I've put that cross, so the stitch that I moved forward to, and then I'll just go cut. The object will disappear and then paste, and it's come back. Now lo and behold, that jump stitch is missing. So the cross has actually moved forward to the end of this object here, but I can go backwards and forwards. So if I click off so nothing's selected, because if I start moving my arrow keys while I've still got something selected, it will actually move the object. So you need to click off so that nothing's selected, and now you can move backwards or forwards. So the left hand arrow will take you back stitch by stitch. So that's my little running stitch, and now it's going back through the leaf, and now it's going back along the stem. So I can go forward along the stem. So it's going to stitch along the stem to here, and then it's going to stitch my leaf, and then stitch back along the bottom of the leaf and continue on with the stem. So that's how Stitch Edit can be used. It can be used to do a lot of things, but that's one way it can be used to eliminate jump stitches where you can't use the branching tool, or where you've got a version older than version 9 where you don't have the branching tool. Then this is the solution to that issue. So I hope that's all made sense. Comment below if you've got any questions, or pop over to my website and join my free community membership for embroidery, because I've got lots of hints and tips in there, and I give you the latest updates of what I'm doing on my website, and you can also interact with other people there and also ask me questions there. So thank you very much for watching, and let's hope you have lots of success with your digitizing.